Hello! Welcome back to Hiatus lesson, red level. This time we're on week 7. I can't believe we've been on video that long. Today we're going to start with a story.
Mr. Popper's Penguins by Richard and Florence Atwater. "Look here," said Mr. Popper at breakfast one morning. "It says here in the Morning Chronicle that Mr. Greenbaum, the owner of the Palace Theater, is in town. He's got a string of theaters all over the country, so I guess we'd better go down and see him." That evening, it was Saturday, the 29th of January, the Popper family and their 12 trained penguins, 2 of them carrying flags in their beaks, left the house to find the Palace Theater. The penguins were now so well trained that Mr. Popper decided it was not necessary to keep them on leashes. Indeed, they walked to the bus line very nicely in the following line of march: Mr. Popper, Greta, Captain Cook, Columbus, Victoria, Mrs. Popper, Nelson, Jenny, Magellan, Adelena, Bill Popper, Janie Popper, Scott, Isabella, Ferdinand, and Louisa. The bus stopped at the corner, and before the astonished driver could protest, they had all climbed on and the bus was on its way. "Do I pay half fare for the birds, or do they go free?" asked Mr. Popper. "Janie goes half fare, but I'm 10, said Bill. "Hush," said Mrs. Popper, as she and the children found their seats. The penguins followed in an orderly fashion. "Say, mister," said the driver, "where do you think you're going with that exhibit?" "Downtown," said Mr. Popper. "Here, let's call it 50 cents and let it go at that." "To tell the truth, I lost count when they went past me," said the driver. "It's a trained penguin act," explained Mr. Popper. "Are they really birds?" asked the driver. "Oh, yes," said Mr. Popper. "I'm just taking them down to the palace to interview with Mr. Greenbaum, the big theater owner." "Well, if I hear any complaints, off they go at the next corner," said the driver. "Fair enough," said Mr. Popper, who wanted to ask for transfers in that case, but decided to let well enough alone. The penguins were behaving very well. They were sitting quietly, 2 in a seat, while the other passengers looked on. "Sorry," said Mr. Popper, addressing everyone in the bus, "but I'll have to open all the windows. These are Antarctic penguins, and they're used to having it a lot colder than this." It took Mr. Popper quite a while to open the windows, which were stuck fast. When he had succeeded, there were plenty of remarks from the other passengers, many of whom began to complain to the driver, who told Mr. Popper to take his birds off the bus. He had to repeat this several times. Finally, he refused to take the bus any further until Mr. Popper got off. By this time, however, the bus had gotten so far downtown that none of them minded having to get out into the street. Only a block ahead of them shone the lights of the Palace Theater. "Hello," said the theater manager, as the Poppers and the penguins trooped past him. "Sure, Mr. Greenbaum's here in my office. You know, I've heard a lot about these birds of yours, but I didn't really believe it. Mr. Greenbaum, meet the Popper penguins. I'll be leaving you. I've got to go backstage." The penguins, now standing politely in 2 rows of 6 each, looked curiously at Mr. Greenbaum. Their 24 white-circled eyes were very solemn. "All you people crowding around the door, go back where you belong," said Mr. Greenbaum. "This is a private conference." Then he got up to shut the door. The Poppers sat down, while Mr. Greenbaum walked up and down the double row of penguins, looking them over. "It looks like an act," he said. "Oh, it's an act, all right," said Mr. Popper. "It's Popper's Performing Penguins. First time on any stage, direct from the South Pole." He and Mrs. Popper had thought up this name for the act. "Couldn't we call them Popper's Pink-Toed Penguins?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. Mr. Popper thought for a moment. "No," he said, "I'm afraid we couldn't. That sounds too much like chorus girls or ballet dancers, and these birds are pretty serious. I don't think they'd like it." "All right," said Mr. Greenbaum. "Show me the act." "There's music to it," said Janie. "Mama plays the piano." "Is that true, madam?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. "Yes, sir," answered Mrs. Popper. "Well, there's a piano behind you," said Mr. Greenbaum. "You may begin, madam." I want to see this act. If it's any good, you people have come to the right place. I've got theaters from coast to coast. But first, let's see your penguins perform. Ready, madam?" "We'd better move the furniture first," said Bill. At that moment, they were interrupted by the manager, who came in with a groan. "What's the matter?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. "The marvelous Marcos who closed the program haven't turned up, and the audience are demanding their money back." "Well, what are you going to do?" asked Mr. Greenbaum. "Give it to them, I suppose, and here it is Saturday night, the busiest night of the week. I hate to think of losing all that money." "I have an idea," said Mrs. Popper. "Maybe you won't have to lose it. As long as it's the end of the program, why don't we just have the penguins rehearse in there on a real stage? We'd have more room, and I think the audience would enjoy it." "All right," said the manager. "Let's try it." So the penguins had their first rehearsal on a real stage. The manager stepped out onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his hand, "with your kind indulgence, we are going to try out a little novelty number tonight. Owing to unforeseen circumstances, the marvelous Marcos are unable to appear. We are going to let you see a rehearsal of the Popper performing penguins instead. I thank you." In a dignified way, the Poppers and the penguins walked out onto the stage, and Mrs. Popper sat down at the piano. "Aren't you going to take your gloves off to play?" asked the manager. "Oh, no," said Mrs. Popper. "I'm so used to playing with them that I'll keep them on if you don't mind." Then she started Schubert's Military March. The penguins began to drill very nicely, wheeling and changing their formations with great precision, until Mrs. Popper stopped playing in the middle of the piece. The audience clapped vigorously. "There's more to it," explained Mrs. Popper, half to the manager and half to the audience, "where they form a hollow square and march in that formation. It's so late we'll skip that tonight and jump on to the second part." "You sure you don't want to take your gloves off, madam?" asked the manager. Mrs. Popper smilingly shook her head and began the Merry Widow Waltz. 10 of the penguins now formed in a semicircle as Nelson and Columbus in their midst put on a wild sparring contest. Their round black heads leaned far back so that they could watch each other with both round white eyes. "Gork," said Nelson, punching Columbus in the stomach with his right flipper and then trying to push him over with his left flipper. "Gaw," said Columbus, going into a clinch and hanging his head over Nelson's shoulder as he tried to punch him in the back. "Hey, no fair," said the manager. Columbus and Nelson broke loose as the other 10 penguins, looking on, applauded with their flippers. Columbus now sparred politely with Nelson until Nelson hit him in the eye, whereupon Columbus retreated with a loud "Ork!" The other penguins began to clap, and the audience joined them. As Mrs. Popper finished the waltz, both Nelson and Columbus stopped fighting, put down their flippers, and stood still facing each other. "Which bird won? Who's ahead?" shouted the audience. "Cook!" said all 10 penguins in the semicircle. This must have meant look, for Nelson turned to look at them, and Columbus immediately punched him in the stomach with one flipper and knocked him down with the other. Nelson lay there, with his eyes closed. Columbus then counted 10 over the prostrate Nelson, and again the other 10 penguins applauded. "That's part of the act," explained Janey. "The other penguins all like Columbus to win, and so they all say gook at the end. That always makes Nelson look away, so Columbus can sock him good." Nelson now rose to his feet, and all the penguins formed in a row and bowed to the manager. "Thank you," said the manager, bowing back. "Now comes part 3, said Mr. Popper. "Oh, Papa," said Mrs. Popper, "you forgot to bring the 2 painting stepladders and the board." "Oh, that's all right," said the manager. "I'll get the stagehands to bring some." In no time at all, a pair of ladders and a board were brought in, and Mr. Popper and the children showed them how the ladders had to be set up, with the board resting on top. Then Mrs. Popper began playing the pretty descriptive piece, "By the Brook." At this point in the act, the penguins always forgot their discipline and got dreadfully excited. They would all begin shoving at once to see which one could be the first to climb the ladders. However, the children had always told Mr. Popper that the act was all the funnier for their pushing and scrambling, and Mr. Popper supposed it was. So now, with a great deal of squawking, the penguins fought and climbed the ladders and ran across the board in complete confusion, often knocking each other entirely off to the floor below, and then hurrying to toboggan down the other ladder and knock off any penguins who were trying to climb up there. This part of the act was very wild and noisy, in spite of Mrs. Popper's delicate music. The manager and the audience were all holding their sides, laughing. At last, Mrs. Popper got to the end of the music and took off her gloves. "You'll have to get those ladders off the stage, or I'll never get these birds under control," said Mr. Popper. "The curtain is supposed to fall at this point." So the manager gave the signal for the curtain to go down, and the audience stood up and cheered. When the ladders had been taken away, the manager had 12 ice cream cones brought in for the penguins. Then Janie and Bill began to cry, so the manager ordered several more, and everyone had one. Mr. Greenbaum was the first to congratulate the Poppers. "I don't mind telling you, Mr. Popper, that I think you've got something absolutely unique in those birds. Your act is a sensation. And the way you helped out my friend the manager here shows you're real troopers, the kind we need in show business. I'd like to predict that your penguins will soon be packing the biggest theaters from Oregon to Maine. And now to come to terms, Mr. Popper," he continued. "How about a 10-week contract at $5,000 a week?" "Is that all right, Mama?" asked Mr. Popper. "Yes, that's very satisfactory," answered Mrs. Popper. "Well, then," said Mr. Greenbaum, "just sign these papers and be ready to open next Thursday in Seattle." "And thanks again," said the manager. "Would you mind putting on your gloves again for just a moment, Mrs. Popper? I'd like you to start playing that military march again and let the penguins parade for a minute. I want my ushers in here to look at those birds. It would be a lesson to them."
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that story. I'm now going to ask 10 questions about the story. Please write your answers in your notebook. The answers will be either yes or no. First, I will ask the question and give you 10 seconds to answer. Then, the question will appear on the screen. Number 1. Were the Poppers used to riding on the bus with their penguins? Number 2. Was it important to Mr. Popper that the penguins be comfortable? Number 3. Did the bus driver throw the penguins off the bus because they were misbehaving? Number 4. Had Mr. Greenbaum asked the Poppers to come to see him? Number 5. Was the audience expecting to see the performing penguins? Number 6. Did Mrs. Popper usually wear her gloves to play piano? Number 7. Was the manager particularly impressed with the Penguins' marching? Number 8. Did the Penguins enjoy performing? Number 9. Was the Poppers' act a success? Number 10. Will the Poppers have to travel to many places with their penguins? Okay, those are the 10 questions. Look back over your paper, and in a second, I will show you the correct answers. Okay, that's it for our story today. Hang around for our next activity. Welcome to Hiatus Lesson Red Level, Week 7. Today, we are moving on to Phase 4. So far, we've learned to describe the general appearance of people, describe their attractiveness, and describe the details of their face and hair. The final phase of a description is what we call a person's distinguishing features. This means a description of anything that would make this person unique. Some of these descriptions are the kinds of things you would use when describing a criminal to the police. Telling the police that the bank robber was medium height and medium weight with medium length brown hair will not help very much because so many people look just like that. But if the bank robber had something that would be unique to only him, describing that would help the police find him. Our first category of distinguishing features will probably only be used for describing men. Facial hair means hair growing on a person's face. Most women and children don't have any facial hair. First, we have a beard. The sentence for all of these is, he has a... For example, he has a long beard. There are many styles of beards. Any hair growing on a man's cheeks, jaw, chin, or neck is called a beard. This man has what we call a full beard. Beards can also be described as long or short or trimmed. This man has a long, full beard. A beard that is grown only on the chin is called a goatee. There are many other styles of beards, but unless you are a barber, just knowing beard and goatee is probably enough. What do you think? Do you like a man with a beard? How about your father? Does he have a beard? This man has a mustache. A mustache is hair grown on the upper lip, but not on the rest of the face. We can use adjectives like bushy, trimmed, or styled to describe a mustache. If a man has both a beard and a mustache, you don't need to mention the mustache. It's included in the beard. Which do you like better, a man with a beard or a man with a mustache? Sideburns is hair grown on the face past the ears. Long sideburns were once a popular style for men, but you don't see it very much these days. Obviously, if a man has a full beard, the sideburns are part of the beard. But you can have sideburns and a mustache, or sideburns and a goatee. To describe a man who has no facial hair, we can say he is clean shaven. Of course, we don't use this description for women or children. Finally, although this isn't facial hair, it is a distinguishing feature for some men. Bald means a man with little or no hair on his head. Balding means a man who has no hair on some part of his head. The sentence we use is, he is bald, or he is balding. Some men who are balding prefer to shave their head. The sentence there would be, he has a shaved head. Are there any men in your family who are bald or balding? Next, we're going to look at tattoos. These days, it is very popular for young people in the US and Europe to get tattoos. So tattoos are an important distinguishing feature. In Japan, tattoos are associated with gangsters, so generally have not been accepted. Some gyms, public baths, and onsen don't allow customers with tattoos. But recently, I have seen more and more young people getting tattoos. The sentence we use for describing tattoos is, he has a tattoo on his arm. Here is a man with a large tattoo on his shoulder and chest. Here is a woman with a tattoo on her back. For some reason, it's popular in America to get tattoos with kanji. Some people choose to get extreme tattoos, sometimes even on their faces. These are called job killer tattoos because there is no way to hide them, which means most employers would not hire someone with these kind of tattoos. How do you feel about tattoos? Would you like to get one? Piercings. Another fashion trend that has become popular around the world is piercings. When I was young, it was very common for women to have pierced ears for earrings, but these days both men and women get piercings, and there has been a growth in the number of piercings and the body parts that get pierced. The sentence is, "She has pierced ears," or "She has a pierced tongue." Here is a woman with a pierced nose. Here is a man with pierced ears and pierced cheeks. Just like tattoos, some people get multiple piercings, like several piercings in the ear. This woman has chosen really extreme piercing. It's hard to understand why. How about you? Do you have any piercings? Do you want to get any? Finally, scars and birthmarks are distinguishing features. Scars are often the result of accidents or medical procedures like an operation. The sentence here is, "He has a scar on his neck." You can also get scars from some illnesses. Maybe the most common kind of scar is left on faces by bad acne. Birthmarks are discoloration of the skin that is present from birth. Usually, birthmarks are dark red or black. They can be located on any part of the body, but are most easily seen on the face. The sentence here would be, "She has a large red birthmark on her cheek." A smaller black bump on the skin is called a mole. Marilyn Monroe was famous for the little black mole on her cheek. The magazines called it a beauty mark. All right, I'm going to show you 5 photos of people with distinguishing characteristics. Please write a full description of these people in your notebook. Pause the video while you are writing. I'm not going to give you a sample answer. Instead, please bring your notebooks to class and I will give you feedback there. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. All right, that is the end of our practice exercise. I hope you were able to come up with good sentences to describe these people. Remember to bring your notebook with you to class next week, and we'll go over your answers there. Now, after 4 weeks of describing people, you should be an expert. Practice your skills by describing people you see on TV or in real life. Okay, that's it for today. I fully expect to see you all in class starting from June 1st. Take care, stay safe, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.